Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. Today's program is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is the Constitution and Presidential Powers, and it's being presented to us by the National Archives. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a collaboration between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a free series we put on every year from January through April. This is just a quick reminder. By participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel for teachers and students to access later. We're really excited that everyone's here today. We hope you participate as much as possible. So just a few reminders about that. If you haven't found your chat box already, it kind of looks like a caption bubble. Go ahead and click on that. That'll be the primary way you can participate today. If you would like to be on camera, we can also work to make that happen. Just go ahead and leave a chat for me in the chat box, and I will help you with that. And just try to be really respectful of our interactive features. We want to make sure that any questions or comments we're making in the chat box or on camera, that they're directly related to what our presenter is speaking about. And with that, I just want to thank you again for coming. We're really excited to have you. This is our website if you're interested in learning more about our upcoming programs, which, as I said, go all the way through April, every Tuesday and Thursday. Or if you're looking for our recordings, you can find those here as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to Sarah, who you came to see. Oh, we can't hear you, Sarah.
Is that better?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your patience and for joining me today. I am really looking forward to what we're going to talk about. I'm just going to share my screen, and you should be seeing a slide that says the Constitution and presidential powers. Great. So, my name is Sarah Davis. I'm an educator at the National Archives. And as you can see, we are going to be discussing the Constitution and the presidential powers that are enlisted within it. So before we do that, I just want to share a little bit about where I work. This is a photo of the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The National Archives is an independent federal agency. It was created in 1935, and it preserves and protects the historically valuable records of the United States government, and it makes them available to the public. So that's one of the most important parts of our job, that making them available to the public. What that means is that every single document that we look at today, you could come and visit in person. You could download for free off of our website. We are holding these records for you and for public use. So when we talk about government records, we talk about things created in the past by the government or used in the work of the government. So records can be important government documents. These can be letters, emails, drafts of laws. They can also be photographs, maps, posters, videos, and more. And the National Archives has over 14 billion records. That's billion with a B. So we're talking about a huge amount of material. And this number is always growing. And among these records are important documents that show how and why our government was created. And these include the Constitution of the United States. You can see that document and its case in our rotunda in Washington, D.C. So the Constitution was signed on September 17th, 1787, by 39 delegates. It was engrossed or written down by Jacob Challis. He was an assistant clerk for the General Assembly, and it took him 40 hours to write it out. He was paid $30 for his work. And this document was ratified on June 21st, 1788. And it sets up our system of government with three branches. So we have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And each branch has different powers and responsibilities. So today, though, we are going to specifically look to the Constitution to learn more about the powers of the executive branch. And for that, we're going to look at Article 2. So Article 2 is laying out the job description. And we'll look a little closer at the primary source document to be able to fill in this description by the end of our time together today. So let's look directly to the source. As historians, we always want to look right at the sources when we can. This is a transcription of the document. And so we can consider, according to the Constitution, what are the qualifications for becoming president? So let's look at that. We can highlight it. So it says no person except a natural born citizen, so that means someone born in the United States, or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years. So they need to be 35 years old and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So they need to have been living in the United States for at least 14 years as part of these qualifications. So from this information, we can begin filling in our job description with these qualifications. So we can see that here. And remember how we mentioned the article is modified by amendments. So amendment means a change. And we're going to use that information to add details to the employment duration section. So how long this job can last for. So now we have a start date. In part, the 20th Amendment says the terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January. And we know how long the job can last for. From the Constitution, it tells us the term of a president is 4 years. And there's an option to serve one additional 4-year term after a successful reelection. And this 4-year term has been in place since our first president. And it also tells us that unless subject to resignation or removal from office. So this comes from the 22nd Amendment and the 25th Amendment. And again, these are later changes to the Constitution. So we now come to another important part of the job description. It's our responsibilities of the presidency. So let's look at some different types of primary sources together that illustrate this section of our job description. So this is a really important part of the job description, as you can imagine, because the presidency has a lot of responsibility. Here's our first document. So I'll give you a moment to look at this. This is a political cartoon by the artist Clifford Berriman. It's showing us one of the very important responsibilities of the president and the presidency. So what do you think is happening in this cartoon? So again, as historians, we want to look at the primary source. We want to notice what we're seeing, and we want to be able to cite evidence that backs up what we're seeing. So that question might be, what's happening in this political cartoon? What do you see that makes you say that? Oh, I see some great answers in the chat. Ringing the White House doorbell. Yeah, so we see this creature is ringing the doorbell to the White House. It says White House. Oh, someone also has noticed he has a label on him. He is a railroad bill. Yes, someone's noticing the Capitol building in the back. So we've been able to place this within a certain area. We know it's in Washington, D.C. at the White House. We know what we're seeing. Someone's identifying it as a scroll. We know that it has a label up towards his shoulder that says railroad bill. So this is a railroad bill. Let's see what else. How would you describe the emotion on this bill's face? How does he look? You think, does he look confident? Does he look concerned? Oh, someone's saying determined, someone says concerned, other people think he looks angry. So let's put together some more information. I see in the chat people are mentioning okay House, okay Senate. So we have a lot of details. You guys are doing a great job with this. So when we look at his expression, he does maybe look a little concerned, right? Or maybe not so sure about what is going to happen. So with all of these details together, does anyone want to take a try to think what process we're seeing in this political cartoon? Anyone know? So we have a bill. It's been approved by the House and the Senate, and it's ringing the doorbell of the White House. What do you think we're seeing? Yes, there's a question in the chat. Is it for the president's approval? So this political cartoon is showing us Congress wanted to pass this bill, to pass the railroad bill. They want the president to approve it. If the president doesn't approve it, it goes back to Congress. And then they would need a 2/3 vote in its favor to pass it by overriding the president's veto. So again, in filling out this job description, we always want to look back to the Constitution. So for this section, we're going to look at Article 1, Section 7. This tells us the president can sign or veto bills. So we can read this text together. It says, every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it, and with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. So with that being said, let's look at that cartoon again. We see this okay House, okay Senate, and we see this railroad bill who's not quite sure of that next step, and he is at the White House to have that presidential action. So really good job on that, everyone. So this is our first responsibility that we have. So let's look at another document together to see part of this responsibility in action. I'm going to share these document analysis questions again. And again, these are questions that can be used with any primary source, not just the ones we look at today. So again, we're looking for details. We're looking for evidence to back up that claim. And we're trying to piece this all together to learn the larger story about what it is we are seeing. So let's zoom in on this document to see if we can answer any of these questions together. So let's start from the beginning. What year is this? When is this document from? Oh yeah, someone is mentioning the law stamp on the top of it. We do see that. Great attention to detail. Yes, we see the year 1965. You guys are doing a great job in the chat. Can anyone find where this document is from? Do we see a place name? Yes, it's from Washington, D.C., and someone else has already identified the purpose of this document. It is talking about an act to enforce the 15th Amendment of the Constitution. So you might remember the 15th Amendment says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is talking about voting rights. So let's look at the top of the document. Who made this document? Or what branch of government? Yes, 89th Congress. Does anyone remember which branch of government Congress refers to? Remember, we have legislative, executive, judicial. Oh, you guys are quick. I already see in the chat. This is from the legislative branch of the government. This act that we are looking about, speaking about voting rights, it outlawed the discriminatory voting practices that were adopted in many southern states after the Civil War. These included literacy tests as a prerequisite to voting. So are there any other interesting details that stand out to you that maybe you want to mention? Yeah, so we see the stamps. We see this is the first session. So let's go to the signature page, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Can anyone read who signed this document? You could either give me the person's name or their job title. So who signed this? Hubert Humphrey, yes, he was the vice president, and as the vice president, he was the president of the Senate. Also see another name there. Yes, we see the Speaker of the House, John W. McCormick. And Lyndon Johnson, yes, great job reading that signature. He was the president. And here is a photo that you can see of President Lyndon B. Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act. We see people observing, including some civil rights leaders. You may recognize some of them. Yes, we see a question in the chat, is that MLK? We see Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. here. Great looking at these details of this photo, everyone. I have to say, I am really so impressed at all this great work that you are doing. So this is another part. There is another part to this responsibility, though. And let's look back to the Constitution. So a president has veto power. With a 2/3 vote, however, the House can override a presidential veto. The word veto doesn't appear in the Constitution, but the power of the president to refuse to sign legislation is clearly outlined in the Constitution. So we see this document. This is an attempted override of President Richard Nixon's veto of S 518, an act to abolish the offices of the director and deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget. So thinking back to our document analysis questions, and this might be, kind of depends how big you're seeing this on your screen. So let me know if you can't see it. But can anyone find a year on this document? I have to look really closely. Yes, so this is 1973. It is really small. I see that comment in the chat. Great job. And we also have President Nixon's explanation for his veto. This is a letter written by Nixon. In it, he refers to what he calls deeply rooted constitutional principle of separation of powers. So of those three branches of government, President Nixon explains he is exercising the veto because S 518 would violate that separation by removing two executive officers from their positions. Nixon says he believes presidential power to remove executive officers is what he calls, quote, an exclusive power that cannot be infringed upon by Congress. Quote. So we see that happen here with a 2/3 vote. The House overrides Nixon's veto. And when you locate the word resolved, we see it says that said bill pass with 2/3 of the senators present having voted in the affirmative. So they're agreeing, they're voting yes. And we can zoom in a little more of that. And that is under this word resolved in this section here. We can also look at a very similar looking document from the House of Representatives. We locate again that word resolved. Oh, there's a question. Has it always been 2/3? 2/3 is the threshold, yes. So we see it says, said bill do not pass. 2/3 of the House of Representatives is not agreeing to pass the same. So the framers of the Constitution gave the president the power to veto acts of Congress to prevent the legislative branch from becoming too powerful. This is an illustration of the separation of powers. It's integral to the US Constitution. So by separating the powers of government into 3 branches, creating a system of checks and balances between them, the framers hoped to prevent the misuse or abuse of power. They wanted each branch to be equally important. And the veto allows the president to check the legislature by reviewing acts passed by Congress and blocking measures that he may find unconstitutional, unjust, or unwise. And Congress's power to override the president's veto forms what's sometimes considered a balance between the branches on this lawmaking power. So again, we are learning so much about this job responsibility for the president. We have been working through these document analysis questions along the way, but here's just another reminder of what we want to be asking when we look at a primary source. This is what we're doing together, and you are doing a fantastic job with it. So the Constitution also gives the president the power to make treaties. We're going to look a little closer at this treaty together. Now we can zoom in a little more. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this document. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. And again, we'll start with trying to place it in time. So can anyone find a date? Yes, 1963, September 24th, 1963. And let's see, where is this document coming from? What branch of government? The Senate. Yes. Does anyone remember? Oh, I see already in the chat, the legislative branch. Man, you all know your US history, history of government. So let's look at some text inside that red box. This is referring directly back to that section of the Constitution that we were discussing. So let's see what it says. I'll give you a moment to read it. It says, whereas the president has submitted a limited nuclear test ban treaty, providing a method of amendment to the Senate for its advice and consent in accordance, and cites the Constitution. Then it goes on, it talks about that treaty power from the Constitution. And again, we see that 2/3 number. So 2/3, this is more than a simple majority. This is a hard threshold to reach. And this was by design. They wanted, these are really important powers, right? So we need them to be kind of difficult to reach. So this isn't happening all the time. Likewise with the ability to amend the Constitution. So we see this multilateral treaty was signed in Moscow by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. And after Senate approval, the treaty that went into effect on October 10th, 1963, banned nuclear weapons testing in our atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. We can see that written out here. And I have a photograph to show you as well. See if I can get to it. Here it is. This is a photograph of President John F. Kennedy. He is signing this treaty. And again, we want to look back to the Constitution. And we can find this treaty power in Article 2, Section 2. And again, this is filling out that job description we are creating for the president. Oh, we have a question. Is Nixon in that photo? Let's look. I'm not sure that I see Richard Nixon. I do see Lyndon B. Johnson here. Oh, another question. What are the silver things on the desk? Great question. I love that you're noticing these details. These are microphones, I believe. We can see the cords. A lot of times the work of the president, as we've already determined, it's such important work. A lot of times it's recorded as well. So sometimes in these photos of the president at work, you might see a microphone, maybe you will see a camera or a video camera. And so the work of the presidency is also recorded in those ways for record keeping, but also so that the public can really see what's happening for transparency of what is going on. But I love how you all are noticing all of these great details. So again, we're looking at this Article 2, Section 2. It says, he, the president, shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And so we see treaties throughout the presidency as well. This is demonstrated in presidencies from the early Republic era too. This is the Treaty of Peace and Amity between the United States and Great Britain. It was signed on December 24th, 1814. It ended the War of 1812 that was fought between Great Britain and the United States. So we can see this is a treaty that's much older than that one that we just looked at. And we still have even more duties to include in our job description. This is a really big job. So let's take a look at some more photos and see what they tell us. Here's our first one. And again, we're going to use some of those same questions. So let's start with this. What people, objects, and or activities do you see? What do you notice in this photo? Someone notices the military. Yeah, we see soldiers. We see uniforms. Anything else? Oh, President Bush, great job. Someone else is mentioning that he is in a suit. So this is a photograph of President George W. Bush from 2003. It does look like he's waving. Great job. And in this photo, President Bush was visiting the Marine Corps base in Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. So let's look at another photo of a different president. So can anyone find the president in this photo and identify him? Oh, you guys are so quick. I already see it in the chat. We see Abraham Lincoln. Someone else is mentioning we are seeing Lincoln and Union troops. You are absolutely correct. Yes, we see in the chat he is wearing his top hat. So this document, I'll tell you a little about it. After the Civil War Battle of Antietam, President Abraham Lincoln was anxious for Major General George B. McClellan to pursue Confederate General Robert E. Lee's army into Virginia. McClellan, believed that his army was not fit to move. Lincoln then unexpectedly visited McClellan and his army to observe its condition. And this photo was taken from this visit. Oh, great job. I see in the chat, people are noticing the army uniform looks different. Yes, so here is this army uniform from 1862. And then we see this army uniform. And again, this photo is from 2003. So you're right, the dress has changed over the years. I love how you're making comparisons between the two photos. Do you know, there's a question about who's in this image other than Lincoln. I don't have the full list of people in front of me, but that would be a really interesting research project to do, to look at this photograph or any historic photograph and see if you can identify the other people who are in it, specifically who are with the president. So we can go back once again to the Constitution and we look at Article 2, Section 2. It is telling us the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. So that's what we're seeing illustrated in these two photos. I think we are seeing what a vast and complex job it is to be president of the United States. So we're now going to look at a group of similar types of documents. These illustrate yet another presidential responsibility. So I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with reading cursive. This document is in cursive, but let's see if we can identify what it is discussing. So I'll give you a minute to look at it and we can go along together. Oh, someone has identified a famous name from it. And that's okay if you can't read cursive. Let's look at it together. Someone in the chat has located Alexander Hamilton's name. So let me read this to you. It says, and I'll travel along with my mouse. Gentlemen of the Senate, I nominate for the Department of the Treasury of the United States, Alexander Hamilton of New York, Secretary. Then we go on to list different names. This says for the Department of War, Henry Knox. So these might be some names you are recognizing. Yes, someone in the chat is saying this includes the names of some of Washington's advisors. You are absolutely correct. After taking office as the nation's first president, George Washington appointed his cabinet. On September 11th, 1789, he nominated Alexander Hamilton as Secretary for the Department of the Treasury. Someone's asking about Thomas Jefferson. So I actually don't see his name listed on this document, but he definitely appears in other documents from the National Archives. If you are particularly interested in documents about Thomas Jefferson, you could always look up docsteach.org. It's our tool for teaching and using primary sources for students and teachers from the National Archives. You could search Thomas Jefferson and several documents will come up. So let's look at this one. We're jumping a little ahead in time. Let's ask ourselves this question with this document analysis. I'll make it a little bigger. So again, we'll start with, when is this document from? What year is this? Yes, 1933. Nice job. Who is writing this document? Can you tell where it's coming from? Oh, FDR, someone says yes. We see the White House written on the top. So we know we're talking about the executive branch. Who is he writing this to? Or who is receiving this information? The Senate. Yes, it says to the Senate of the United States. So President Franklin D. Roosevelt notified the U.S. Senate on March 4th, 1933, that he had nominated Frances Perkins of New York to be the Secretary of Labor. She was confirmed in this position. She became the first woman who was appointed to a cabinet position. She was the longest serving labor secretary. She served for 12 years between 1933 and 1945. She was also the first woman to enter the presidential line of succession. So we have a lot of information in this document and kind of additional information we can learn. Yes, someone else is pointing out this is during the era of the Great Depression. So here is another similar or another nomination document in its similarity. I'll give you a moment to look at that and to look at this photo. We see a similar first with this nomination. Yes, people have identified this is Ronald Reagan in the tan suit we see in the photo. Does anyone know who's sitting with him? Let's look to the document to see if we can piece that together. Oh, yes, someone else is saying this is talking about the Supreme Court. Absolutely. And I see that answer in the chat. This is Sandra Day O'Connor with him. What job was President Ronald Reagan nominating Sandra Day O'Connor for? Again, look to the document. The first female justice. Yes, she was being nominated for the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. During Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign for president, he promised to nominate a woman for the Supreme Court. President Reagan followed through on this pledge on August 19, 1981, by nominating Arizona State Court of Appeals Judge Sandra Day O'Connor. The U.S. Senate confirmed O'Connor on September 22nd, 1981. And there's a question, are there still women on the Supreme Court? There are women who are currently serving on the Supreme Court. So President Ronald Reagan nominated Sandra Day O'Connor to the Supreme Court of the United States in 1981. She was the first woman nominated to this position. Her appointment garnered unanimous Senate approval. That means all the senators voted in favor of appointing her. She served 24 terms on the Supreme Court before she retired in 2006. So again, we want to look to the Constitution to understand this power. And we are back again to another section, to Article 2, Section 2. I will give you a moment to read that. I'm going to just check and make sure I'm caught up on the questions on the chat. So we can see this is talking about the nominating power. And as we know, when you are on the Supreme Court, how long do you serve? How long can you stay on the court for? Does anyone know? For life, yes, you can stay as long as you are able and willing and wanting to stay. So this is a really important job. So here we go. So we see this Article 2, Section 2. The president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, public ministers and consul, judges of the Supreme Court, and other officers of the United States. So we have discovered a lot from this article of the Constitution, but there is still more. So this document we're seeing here is from 1848. So it's a little hard to read. I'm going to zoom in to focus on a section of it, but I'm also going to share a transcript. I want to show the original document so that you are able to see it, but I know the cursive can be difficult. So when we look at the transcript, we can see what it says typed. This is the whole document, the transcript of the whole document. But let's just focus on these last 2 lines. Yes, someone has identified, you found that name, James K. Polk. So what do you think is being discussed here? Any ideas? A fine. Yeah, so we see mention of a fine. Look at those last 2 lines for a hint if you need one. Yes, we see it in the chat. It is a pardon. Says, now be it known that I, James K. Polk, President of the United States of America, in consideration of the premises, and then there's a word that's illegible, so we're not able to read it. Other good and sufficient reasons, me thereunto moving, have remitted and do hereby remit unto him, the said Matthew Stetson, the fine imposed as aforesaid, and have granted and do hereby grant unto him a full and unconditional pardon. So we're talking about pardons. The president can grant a pardon. This is granting a reprieve or forgiving an offense. And this we see in Article 2, Section 2. Yes, someone's describing it as a get out of jail free card. So we have made it now to the last section of our job description. These are examples of executive orders from a president. So let's look closer with our document analysis questions. So what is this that we're seeing? What is it talking about? Any other interesting things you notice? Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. I can't on that one. So let's think about this. It says providing assistance for the removal of an obstruction of justice within the state of Arkansas. Yes, saying obstruction of justice. So this executive order using the military, yes, great detail that we are seeing here. And if we look down in this section, it's saying someone has willfully obstructed the enforcement, so they haven't listened to an order from the U.S. District Court with respect to matters relating to enrollment and attendance at public schools, particularly at Central High School located in Little Rock, Arkansas. So the president is stepping in to enforce school desegregation laws. Yes, someone is pointing out in the chat during the civil rights movement, students were not, that there was sometimes actions like we're seeing here had to be taken to be sure that the laws were enforced and that all students had access to the same quality education. And this executive order signed by President Dwight Eisenhower sent federal troops to maintain order and peace during the integration of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. On May 17th, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in the court case Brown versus Topeka Board of Education that segregated schools were inherently unequal, and it ordered the U.S. public schools to be desegregated, they said, with all deliberate speed. So within a week of this 1954 decision, Arkansas was one of 2 southern states to announce it would begin immediately to take steps to comply with the Brown decision. And Congressman Brooks Hayes and Little Rock Mayor Woodrow Mann asked the federal government for help, and first in the form of U.S. Marshals. And President Eisenhower, as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, we know this is one of his duties as president, he was presented with a difficult problem. He was required to uphold the Constitution and the laws, but he also wanted to avoid a violent confrontation in Arkansas. So with an executive order, he placed the Arkansas National Guard under federal control, and he sent 1,000 U.S. Army paratroopers to assist them in restoring order in Little Rock. And again, we see this right under the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 tells us the president shall take care the laws be faithfully executed. So that is what we are seeing here. And this is just one of many of these responsibilities. Again, we can go back to our job description and see all the different important parts of the job of what the president does. So let's put this all together. And we have our full job description. This is a big job, right? There are a lot of responsibilities, a lot of requirements. So additional requirements also include taking an oath of office. And we see that in some modern photos here. President Gerald Ford in 1974 and President Barack Obama in 2013. So that's a great question. There's a question, are there education requirements? So we don't see those listed in the Constitution. And then we have an older photo as well. This is the this is the inauguration of President Grant. The president is also charged with providing a State of the Union. And that is a speech that is usually made annually to Congress. We see in the Constitution, he shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the State of the Union. And there's a question about, is the president considered an officer of the government? So I believe that he is. So let's go back to this job description. We see this from the documents, this idea of the president as an officer of the government. Has anyone skipped their State of the Union? Is a question in the chat. Not that I am aware of, but I'm not sure. I can't say for sure. So it'll be another great question to research. Has any president ever skipped the State of the Union? Because I don't know, but great question. I'm going to look that up. So here is our job description. What do you all think? Is this a job you might want someday? What do you think? Does anyone here think this job sounds like one you can't wait to have when you're old enough? Oh, I see in the chat, it looks hard. It does look hard, but from the questions and the answers you all have provided, I think you'd be great at it. You are so knowledgeable about this history, looking closely. So I see some other questions, some other answers in the chat. People are saying it looks hard. They're not interested. It looks like it could be dangerous. Someone else says, I thought about it, but ended up changing my mind. So this is a really big job. And I think we're seeing that when we look at the Constitution and we see all of these requirements and responsibilities to be the president. So thank you all very much for looking at the Constitution with me and helping to determine these answers and the job requirements for the presidency. Oh, I see a teacher in the chat is saying, I expect one of my former students, to be president one day. Someone else is saying it looks like a very honorable and important job for anyone. Absolutely. I agree. So thank you all for looking at these documents. You did, once again, a really great job. This is hard stuff. We looked at a lot of primary sources. We analyzed the Constitution, all different things.